Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we could reach 1100 likes on this one. It only takes just a quick second and it helps out the channel immensely. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I do post content just like this all of the time. Sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads. Right after the ad break after this intro, there will not be any more ad breaks after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. We met at a pool party. I remember that day clearly. It was in the middle of an unforgettable heat wave. Elfie smiled at me from across the pool, and the rest was history. Not only was he gorgeous and completely unaware of it, but he was also a fantastic listener. No matter who he spoke to, he listened intently. He was never just waiting for his turn to speak, never just nodding absent-mindedly. He absorbed every word, eyes bright and understanding. Later, when I told him that was one of my favorite things about him, he smiled and said, "Most people just want to be understood. It isn't difficult if you pay attention." He has always paid attention. Even in early months of our relationship, he remembered everything. How I take my coffee, which side of the bed I prefer, that I can't sleep without my bedside fan or my childhood teddy, Scrappy. There had always been a quiet predictability to our life together. We'd wake up at the same time each morning. I'd shower first. He'd make coffee. We'd meet in the kitchen in the soft light of dawn before the day properly began, moving around one another with the ease that comes from long-term familiarity. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we wouldn't. Silence never felt uncomfortable. Then came the shift. He was handing me my morning coffee. Milk and 2 sugars, right? I laughed because I thought he was joking. We'd been together for 9 years, married for 4, and I'd never taken sugar in my coffee. Not once. "No sugar, you're sweet enough," he'd say. We had both been sleeping a little less than usual lately. I put it down to nothing more than a brief moment of forgetfulness because of tiredness. I kissed him on the cheek, took the coffee, and told him not to worry about it. Then he started watching me sleep. Now, I've always been a light sleeper. A change in temperature or a shift in the light will wake me. For years, that sensitivity never bothered me. If I woke in the early hours and turned my head, I'd find Elfie beside me exactly as expected, fast asleep with one arm tucked beneath the pillow, breathing deeply. Recently, though, I'd turn to face him and find him already awake, not moving, not on his phone, doom scrolling, just simply lying there, looking right at me. The first time it happened, I smiled at him, still half asleep, and asked what he was doing. "Couldn't sleep?" he said. "Did I wake you?" "No," I told him, and reached for his hand beneath the covers. But it kept happening. Not every night, but enough for me to pick up on it. Each time, the explanation was reasonable. He'd woken early. He'd had something on his mind. He hadn't wanted to disturb me by getting up. Although it made sense, it kept me up at night. There was something about the way he was watching me that bothered me. It wasn't intrusive or intense. If anything, it was gentle. The same attentive expression he'd always worn around me. But lying there in the dark, meeting his eyes before either of us had fully entered the day, I had the faint, disorienting sense that something was off. I just couldn't put my finger on what. Even with minimal sleep, life continued, as it does. The usual routine of work, dinner, and an evening lounging on the sofa. All the normal things. He became more perceptive than ever, more aware of my moods, quicker to anticipate what I needed before I asked. It felt, on the surface, like a deepening of the same gentle love he'd always shown me. Which is why when I'd catch him staring, I'd tell myself it was nothing more than a look of admiration. And for a while, I had no reason to believe otherwise. With time, the staring crept its way into the daytime, too. I'd be washing the dishes and would catch him in the reflection of the kitchen window, standing behind me, still as a statue, just watching me. I'd turn around and he'd spring back to life, tending to whatever menial task had previously garnered his attention. He also started repeating things I said. It would happen hours after the initial conversation, sometimes even the next day. He'd do it casually and in a slightly altered context, as though the words had occurred to him independently. One afternoon I mentioned that the air in the house felt strangely heavy. It wasn't a particularly unusual observation, just something I had said without thinking as I opened a window. At the time, he'd simply nodded. But then later that evening, as we sat on the sofa scrolling through Netflix, he looked around the room and said those exact words. "The air feels strangely heavy." I waited for a sign that he was joking, that he was deliberately echoing me, but instead, he looked mildly contemplative, like the thought was completely his own. When I asked what he meant, he shrugged. I know it might not sound like much, but I can't express how unlike Elfie these behaviors were. There were other changes too, like slightly delayed responses. I don't think anyone else would have picked up on it, but I knew my husband like the back of my hand. He was changing. If I laughed, he laughed, but a little too late. If I frowned, he frowned, but after a pause. It felt like he was mirroring me, as though without my lead, he wouldn't know which emotion to express. One evening, after a particularly shitty day at work, I relayed my frustrations to him. It was nothing dramatic, just office politics, the sort of thing we'd discussed 100 times before. As I spoke, I watched his face. For a brief moment after I finished, his expression remained completely neutral. Then, as if remembering what should come next, his features arranged themselves into sympathy. "That sounds frustrating," he said. The words were correct. The tone was correct too. And yet, for reasons I couldn't properly justify, I felt uncomfortable. Enough was enough. I decided I would call him out on it, hoping to clear things up to stop me feeling so on edge all the time. "You've been a bit different lately," I said one day as we cleared the dishes, hoping I didn't sound too accusatory. He looked up at me, his expression blank. "Different?" The word hung between us for a moment. I felt a flicker of embarrassment, wondering if maybe I shouldn't have said anything. I opened my mouth to soften the blow, to explain that I hadn't meant anything serious by it, but he spoke first. "I'm sorry if it feels that way. Work's been taking up more space in my head than I realized." His voice was warm, reassuring, just like always. I nodded, already prepared to let the matter go. But then, in that same even tone, he continued, "You've seemed a little on edge yourself recently." "What?" I said, surprised. "I assumed that maybe you were just tired. You haven't been sleeping properly." He was right. I hadn't. With a small, sympathetic smile, Elfie stepped closer, resting his hand lightly against my arm. "You've been noticing things more, haven't you?" I nodded. Sometimes when you focus on the little things too much, they start to feel bigger than they are. I contemplated his words. It wasn't until that exact moment I considered maybe I had been the problem all along. The conversation began with me expressing a small uncertainty about him, but now I was questioning myself instead. "Yeah," I eventually replied. "Like you said, I'm probably just tired." From then on, I deliberately tried to stop noticing things, telling myself that it's easy for ordinary behaviors to appear unusual if you examine them too closely. So instead, when he paused before responding, I'd tell myself he was just thinking. When I caught him looking at me from across the room, I assumed he was just admiring me. When small details slipped, like a forgetful moment or a repeated phrase, I let them pass without comment. This worked at first. The house felt calmer, But underneath that calm ran a thin, persistent awareness that I was working quite hard to maintain it, that I was adjusting my own perception, so that nothing he did would seem unusual enough to question. I snapped out of that mindset one evening when he did something so strange and out of character that I just couldn't ignore it. I'd been brushing my teeth when I caught him staring again. I spun around and met his gaze, expecting him to smile or say something. He didn't move, he didn't break eye contact. He just stood there, hands by his sides, head tilted slightly, staring. Something about his eyes bothered me. They were a little too wide, and there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite place, and with it came a feeling I'd never felt towards Elfie before. Dread. After what felt like eternity, he parted his lips to speak. "You've been brushing your teeth for a while now. Everything okay?" How long had he been standing there? He walked towards me, eyes unblinking. Instinctively, I took a step back. He noticed and let out a chuckle, seemingly amused by my uncertainty. I tried to stand my ground as he approached me further, but my body flinched as he raised a hand to my shoulder. Another chuckle. "Come on, darling. Let's go to bed." My heart sank. Darling? He never called me that. I was certain. Then, he was different. So in the days that followed, I began testing him. While pretending everything was fine, I purposefully changed small details in my stories to see how he'd react. The old Elfie would have questioned me, maybe gently corrected me, but this altered Elfie didn't register. Or if he did, he didn't let on. I spoke about the day we first met, describing it as a snowy day in December. He didn't correct me, so I kept going. I talked about wearing a brown fur coat when we passed each other on the street. I told an entirely fabricated story, watching him closely, waiting for him to burst out laughing or call me out on my BS. But he didn't. He listened without interruption, smiling softly. That evening, as we lay in bed in the dark, he rolled onto his side and said softly, "You're as beautiful as you were the day I met you." I froze, waiting to see if he'd taken the bait. "I knew even then that you were someone I could build a life with. That beautiful snowy day changed everything for me." I felt sick. I rolled over and pretended to be asleep, but I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay there, staring at the wall, wondering where the Elfie I knew and loved had gone. I cried softly as he slept, oblivious to my heartache. The next morning he handed me my coffee. "2 sugars," he said. "Extra sweet, just like you." I set the mug down on the counter, a little too forcefully, startling him. "We didn't meet in December," I said flatly. "It was August, during that awful heat wave, remember?" He looked up at me confused. "No," he said slowly. "It was definitely December. It was snowing. You were wearing that brown fur coat." I scoffed and shook my head. "I've never owned a fur coat in my life. You know I hate fur." He held my gaze, as if waiting for me to correct myself. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure," I snapped, grabbing the mug and pouring its contents down the sink. "And I don't take sugar in my coffee." "Yes, you do. You always have." "2 sugars, sweet like you. Are you feeling all right?" "No," I snapped. "No sugar. I'm sweet enough." We stood in silence, waiting for the other to cave. "Sorry," he muttered eventually. "I've been a bit forgetful recently. I'm sure you're right." He looked genuinely sorry, and I felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't said anything unkind. And there I was snapping at him, slamming things about. Something I never did, not even on our worst days. I had acted out of character, and the irony of that was not lost on me. I exhaled deeply, the fight draining out of me as quickly as it had arrived. "No, I'm sorry," I said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. "I shouldn't have snapped like that." He accepted my apology and kissed my cheek before leaving for work. Once again, I couldn't shake the creeping suspicion that perhaps this really was all my fault, that I was the one distorting ordinary moments into something they weren't. I felt like I was losing my mind. That evening, I would doubt my sanity once again. I was getting ready for bed, only Scrappy wasn't on the pillow where I'd left him. "Elf?" I called, tearing apart the duvet and searching under the bed. He appeared in the doorway, wearing a pair of blue pajamas I'd never seen before. He normally slept in his boxers. I can't find Scrappy," I said, putting the pajamas to the back of my mind. "I've looked everywhere." I was met with the blank stare I was becoming all too familiar with. "Scrappy?" I repeated. "I can't find him." Elfie pointed to the cupboard. "Why is he in there?" I asked. "You put him there." "What? No, I didn't." Yeah, you did. You definitely put him in there this morning. I watched you do it." I tried to think back, but all I could remember of that morning was Elfie's sorry expression, and the guilt I'd felt for accusing him of being different. The dull ache pulsed behind my eyes, so I closed them, pinching the bridge of my nose. Maybe he was right. Perhaps I'd accidentally tidied Scrappy away. That didn't feel right to me, but it wasn't entirely impossible. I couldn't focus on the office the next day. He had definitely been wrong, hadn't he? Of course we met in the summer, right? Had I really put Scrappy in the wardrobe by mistake? Then I started to wonder if it even mattered at all. I eventually concluded that perhaps it didn't, and once again, I was prepared to let it all go. I stopped by the bakery on the way home from work to get some of those blueberry muffins he loved. A peace offering. A way to put this whole thing behind us. I let myself in the front door, box of muffins tucked under one arm. Before I could shout hello, I noticed him sitting on the sofa with his hands placed neatly in his lap. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, staring at the TV. It was switched off. Our eyes met in the reflection of the black screen, and he slowly turned to face me. He raised his arm robotically and gave a forced, unnatural wave of his hand. You bought muffins." His voice was devoid of emotion. "Chocolate?" "Blueberry." "Oh." His mouth formed a thin line, and he slowly turned away from me. "I thought they were your favorite," I said to the back of his head. "I'm allergic to blueberries." I stood there dumbfounded. He absolutely was not allergic to blueberries. He wasn't allergic to anything. Anger surged through my veins, and I bit my tongue. He was messing with me. He had to be. "You weren't the last time you ate them," I muttered. "Look," he replied, taking a deep breath and turning to face me. "I don't know what's going on with you recently, and I didn't really want to say anything, but I'm starting to get worried. You keep getting things confused, and it's clearly making you angry. That's so unlike you. You've just been so different lately." "Me?" I scoffed. "You're the one who keeps staring at me and copying me and being all weird." I had never raised my voice at Elfie before. He looked shocked, then disappointed. He shook his head solemnly. "See what I mean?" he said quietly. "You've got it all backwards. You're the one doing all those things. I wake up in the night and you're just watching me, staring at me, and you keep repeating things I've said. Really weird, insignificant things like, 'Oh, the air feels strangely heavy in here,' when I'd literally said that exact phrase only hours before." "What? There's no way. That couldn't be possible, could it?" My heart began to thud and my head spun, causing me to stumble backwards. Elfie jumped up and rushed over, offering me his arm. I took it, trying to swallow the sickness that was creeping up from the pit of my stomach. "Let's talk about this later, okay?" he said softly before kissing my forehead. "Why don't you go take a nice bath? We can both take a moment to cool off, and we'll have a chat this evening. Sound good?" I nodded. I took myself upstairs, locking the bathroom door behind me. For a while I just stood there, hands clutching the edge of the sink as I stared at my own reflection. The skin under my eyes was puffy, almost purple. I tried to slow down the sudden, shallow rhythm of my breathing. How could I possibly be the one in the wrong? I was certain that blueberry muffins were his favorite. We'd had blueberry cake at our wedding, too. It had this beautiful pale baby blue icing, with fresh blueberries cascading down one side. I was sure of it. I made a mental note to dig out the photo album later and prove it to myself. I turned the taps on, letting the bathroom fill with steam as thoughts whirred around in my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut as a sharp, pulsing headache pressed behind my temples. I shifted my focus to the sound of the rushing water, waiting for the pain to fade into a dull ache. When I opened my eyes, the water had nearly risen to the rim of the tub. I lurched forward and twisted the taps, not bothering to question how long I'd zoned out for. I lowered myself into the bath. The house was quiet, and the warm water offered some sense of comfort. My eyelids grew heavy, and I allowed them to close, focusing on my breath. In, out, in, out. I stayed like that for a while, before drifting into a dreamless sleep. A loud creak woke me up. I glanced over at the locked door. The thin strip of light beneath it dimmed suddenly. A shadow. Every muscle in my body went rigid as I stared at the narrow line. Someone was standing there, right on the other side of the door, not moving, not knocking, just there. I could feel it in the air, the way you can feel someone's presence even without seeing them. That unmistakable awareness of another body occupying the space just inches away from yours. Seconds dragged past, heavy and distorted. My heart pounded. Then, without warning, the shadow vanished. Erratic footsteps tore down the hallway outside, thundering away from the door. Too fast, too uneven. A chaotic scramble that sent a violent jolt through my entire body. I flinched so hard that the water sloshed over the side of the tub. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving behind a suffocating silence that pressed in from all sides. Had that really just happened? Had I been dreaming? In a daze, I reached for a towel and dried myself off. In the bedroom, I put on my pajamas, grabbing Scrappy from the bed and pulling him close to my chest. I lingered in the doorway for a moment before forcing myself into the hall and down the stairs. When I reached the bottom and looked into the living room, I stopped. Everything was wrong. The sofa was pressed up against a different wall with a blanket I'd never seen before folded neatly over the back of it. The TV sat on the other side of the room. In fact, every piece of furniture was in a completely different place. I looked at the curtains. They used to be gray, but now they were blue. The candles on the side table were green, not orange. But most disturbingly of all, there, on the mantelpiece, was a photo from our wedding. Slowly, I edged towards it. "Babe?" Elfie appeared from the kitchen. I leant in, examining the picture. We were cutting the cake. Our plain, white wedding cake. I collapsed to my knees. Elfie hurried across the room, his footsteps quick but careful. He crouched down beside me, lifting my chin with his finger. "Hey, what is it?" he asked, his voice low and soft. The kindness in it was too much. My chest tightened, and before I could stop myself, I began to cry. I buried my face in his chest, clutching his shirt. He wrapped his arms around me without hesitation, holding me close as I shook against him. "It's going to be okay," he whispered. "I've got you." I took the next few days off work, and so did Elfie. I didn't ask him to, but he insisted. He held my hand as I made a call to the doctors, setting up an appointment for the following week. He brought me coffee, black, no sugar. He even rearranged the furniture just to put me at ease. "Huh? I like it better this way," he said. as he stood back and admired the room. I smiled. "Thank you," I said weakly. My head still throbbed and my eyes were still crusty from all the tears, but I felt okay, for the first time in a while. I felt hopeful. Elfie was right. It was going to be okay. We went to the appointment together. The doctor didn't look at me when he spoke. "Stress," he said, tapping something into the computer. "And exhaustion. Very common." He printed the prescription and handed it to me. "These will help you sleep. Deep sleep. That's what you need." Elfie squeezed my hand with a reassuring smile. The first week of taking the tablets was bliss. I'd pop a pill and fall asleep within minutes. And it was a good sleep, too. Dreamless, like I was dead to the world. But nothing lasts forever, apparently, as sometime during the second week, I started feeling the side effects. I kept having these awful nightmares. In them, I'd wake up to find Elfie acting strangely. In one dream, he was completely naked and hunched over, his mouth hanging open in a wide, unnatural smile that stretched the skin of his cheeks. In another, I rolled over in bed to find him staring at me, his eyes so wide I could see the whites all the way around the irises. Every time I'd squeeze my eyes shut, willing the dream to end. Eventually, I'd fall back asleep and wake up sometime later in a cold sweat. I'd tell Elfie about the nightmares each morning. He'd listen, frowning, equally as disturbed by them as I was. He suggested that perhaps my brain was just adjusting to the medication, that eventually the dreams would stop. "I hope so," I said. "I don't know how much more of this I can take. They're not real, remember? Just dreams." I nodded. "Just dreams." That night I awoke suddenly, heart thudding. I sat up. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and at the end of the hallway something moved. He was there on all fours. My husband was crouched at the end of the corridor, his spine arched strangely high, his head hung low between his shoulders. His eyes were wide, wild, and fixed on me. "Elfie?" His mouth opened. That same huge, silent smile. Then he moved. With a jerking of limbs, he scurried at an inhuman speed. Palms and feet slapping the floor as he rushed towards the bedroom. I shrieked and threw myself back into bed, dragging the covers over my head. The mattress dipped as he climbed onto it. I squeezed my eyes shut and held my breath, waiting for fingers, teeth, anything. I woke gasping for air. Morning light filled the room. The door was closed, Elfie's side of the bed cold and empty. That night I didn't take a tablet. I kept this information to myself, not wanting to concern Elfie. I waited until he was in the bathroom, then slipped the tablet back into the bottle and returned to the bedside drawer. When he came to bed, I pretended to swallow it with a sip of water. I lay awake for hours waiting for nightmares that never came. At some point, Elfie stirred next to me. I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep, not wanting him to question why I was awake. I felt a soft tap on my shoulder. "Dang it," I thought. "He's on to me." I kept my breathing slow and heavy, counting a few seconds before stirring to make my sleepy act seem more convincing. When I rolled over, his voice came from across the room. "Over here." When my eyes adjusted to the night, I saw him standing rigidly in the corner of the room. His eyes bulged from his face, as though something inside his skull was pushing them outward. Saliva dripped from his gaping mouth, which was stretched into a wide, panting grin. Something at his side shimmered in the light of the moon. A knife. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I watched in horror as he slowly raised the blade to his neck, dragging it gently across his throat in a silent, mocking promise. I shut my eyes and turned away, burrowing beneath the duvet. My body locked in terror as I felt him crawl back into bed. He fell asleep not long after. I lay awake trembling, still unable to move. When the morning light finally crept through the curtains and I heard him rise to start his day, I realized what I'd witnessed hadn't been a dream at all, because I had never fallen asleep. I made a plan to pack up my things and get the hell out of there, whether I was imagining it or not. I couldn't risk staying in that house with him. He checked on me before leaving for work. As I lay in bed pretending to be sick, I mumbled some excuse about calling the office to tell them I wasn't coming in. He rested his hand on my forehead, and it took every ounce of my being not to recoil. "You do feel clammy," he said, feigning a look of concern. "Do you want me to stay with you?" My pulse raced. "No," I said, trying to sound casual. "No point. I'll be asleep for most of the day, I imagine." He nodded. "Okay, well, take it easy. I'll be back this evening to look after you. I love you." I waited for the sound of the front door to close behind him before springing out of bed. I just needed the essentials: my keys, my phone, my charger, my purse. I'd figure the rest out later. I shoved my things into a bag and hurried down the stairs. Scrappy. I ran back to the bedroom. He wasn't on the bed. He wasn't under it. The wardrobe. I flung open the cupboard and rifled through the contents. He was buried beneath a pile of clothes that had fallen from their hangers. I went to grab him, but something else caught my eye. The glossy corner of a photograph peeked out from a small gap in the back panel of the wardrobe. A sickening thought crossed my mind. Pressing gently against it, the panel shifted with a soft, reluctant creak, revealing a narrow seam that hadn't been there before. Heart hammering, I pushed it further. It was a secret compartment. I took a closer look at the photo that had led me to this discovery. Vomit rose in my throat, my hands shaking as the picture fell from my gentle grasp. It was us on our wedding day, cutting our cake. Our blueberry cake. Reluctantly, I leant forward, peering into the compartment. Our photo albums were back there, but they looked different. I pulled one out and opened it. On every page, sticky notes clung to the photographs, frantic arrows, underlines, suggestions. The notes didn't describe our memories. They dissected them, speculating how each image could be changed, reframed, and made to say something else entirely. There was a picture of us in the living room when we first moved in together. The furniture was exactly where I'd remembered it being. A cold, sharp dread settled in my chest as the pieces fell into place. Every conversation that had left me doubting myself, every time I caught him staring at me, every odd behavior, every time he'd convinced me I was the problem, all of it had been orchestrated by him, by Elfie, by the love of my life. The slow erosion of my sanity hadn't been accidental. For months and months he sowed the seed of doubt in my mind, manipulating me, tricking me, gaslighting me. All of it had been real, and all of it had been him. I sat there on the bedroom floor, a sea of ominous rushing through me. I felt everything all at once, and it was too much for me to deal with then and there. A voice in the back of my head told me it would take years of therapy to unpack this. I wouldn't be able to trust anyone ever again. Numbly, I retrieved the belongings and descended the stairs. The urgency I'd had only minutes ago had completely left my body. There wasn't room for it. I was halfway to the door when it opened toward me. "Only me. I forgot my—" We stopped. Our eyes met. With a look of concern I knew was pretend, Elfie examined my face, checking for tears, for anger, for anything that might tell him what he was walking into. I watched him do it. I watched the familiar softness appear, that careful attentive he wore when he thought something was wrong. Then he saw it. He saw that I knew. His concern vanished in an instant. It was as if a switch had been flipped behind his eyes, the warmth replaced with something icy and cold. "You figured it out," he said. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I simply looked back at the stranger in front of me. the love I once had for him non-existent. Why? I asked. Why did you do it? He shrugged. No, I said. I need an answer. It's the least I deserve. His eyes were steady and clear but eerily empty, as if nothing human stirred behind them. Because I could. And that was it. All that he'd done, all that he'd put me through. There was no reason, no master plan. It was all for sport. I pushed past him, door closing behind me as I headed for my car. I sat with my hands on the wheel as I stared back at the house we'd shared together. It was nothing more to me now than a pile of bricks. While reversing out the drive, unsure of where I was going, a realization hit me. I understood with a cold and final clarity that the most terrifying part wasn't what he'd done. It wasn't why he'd done it. It was how easily he would go on living now, untouched, unbothered, while I gathered the scattered pieces of my mind he had so carefully, deliberately broken, just because he could. It was 10 p.m. when the fog rolled in. I was driving home after visiting a client in a town 80 miles away. It had been a long day and I struggled to stay focused on the road. The gray vapor engulfed my car like the breath of some otherworldly creature. I knew right away that I wouldn't make it home. I needed to find somewhere to rest. Not being familiar with the area, I crept through the fog, eyes wide, until a neon sign flickered at me. Beep, beep. Motel. Vacancy. The Y in vacancy crackled, threatening to give out. I pulled into the parking lot. It was empty except for an ancient pickup truck tucked in a corner. The motel itself looked so run down I wondered if it was abandoned, until I noticed the office light. This was far from a dream accommodation, but it would do for one night. The tiny office smelled of microwaved food and cigarette smoke. No one was behind the desk. My eyes fell on a brochure rack displayed on a rickety table. Through the yellowed paper, a group of friends smiled at each other as they strolled through a theme park, drinks in hand. A sharp pang shot through my body. I immediately looked away and rang the bell. To my surprise, the manager walked in immediately, as if he had been waiting behind the door. He was a willowy man of undetermined age, who looked like he hadn't showered in a while. He glanced up at me from under his brow, shyly, and whispered, "Welcome to the Beep Beep Motel." "Can I have a room for tonight?" I asked impatiently. "Most certainly. Room 6? He handed me a key with slender hands. His nails were upsettingly long. "It's the last room on the ground floor. Breakfast is served in the office from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. He pointed at a crusty coffee machine. "I'm afraid we don't have the internet. Checkout is whenever you need. Enjoy your stay." This must be the seediest motel in town, I thought. He hadn't even asked me for an ID. I grabbed the key and hurried toward my room. I passed a small service area. There was a coin laundry, a nearly empty vending machine, and I stopped short. A phone booth. I hadn't seen one in decades. A faded sign hung on the outside. "Come inside. Try our world-famous Afterlife phone." I couldn't imagine anything in this motel being world-famous. "You noticed it." I jumped. The manager was standing right there, watching me. Yeah?" Our guest's favorite feature. He smiled an almost charming smile. Little gray teeth appeared between his lips. His eyes glimmered. "What's an afterlife phone?" "Just like the name says, it's a phone to call the afterlife. If you speak into it, your loved ones on the other side will hear you." "Is that right?" I snickered, but inside my heart skipped a beat. "That's absolutely right." "And do they talk back?" This man cocked his head to the side. "Maybe." "Not sure?" Depends if they have something to say. How convenient. With a smirk, I walked away. The room was the kind that seems acceptable at first glance, but upon closer inspection, filth starts popping up everywhere. Dust on the surfaces, stains on the carpet, an unidentified sticky substance on the door handles. I lay on the bed fully clothed, suspecting bugs were hiding in the wrinkles of the sheet. A stagnant smell rose from the pillow and drifted into my nostrils. This would not help with my insomnia. I forced my eyes closed. After 10 years of sleep disturbance, I learned that if I will my body into stillness, sleep will eventually come, if only for a couple of hours. It did not. There was a restlessness in my heart that would not quiet down. As if guided by an invisible power, I got up and walked back through the cold fog toward the phone booth. The sliding door creaked as I stepped inside. I picked up the receiver. Unsurprisingly, the phone was disconnected. Yet, it didn't sound dead. The silence that emanated from it was deep and enveloping. Comforting somehow, like a warm breath. I rolled my tongue around my mouth. It was dry as a desert. Would I let yet another day of silence go by? Or could this forlorn phone booth, in a forlorn motel, on a dark and lonely night, be my chance to speak? Hi, Nina. I bit my tongue, literally. I tasted blood. I thought about hanging up and walking off. I should have, but the inviting silence on the other end of the line encouraged me to continue. It dawned on me that all I had ever wanted this whole time was permission to talk about her. To talk to her. Can you hear me? I stammered. How are you? Sorry, stupid question. I'm sorry I didn't go to your funeral. I never forgot you. That's what I wanted to say. I never forgot you. Not a day goes by that I don't think about you. I swear. I remember your smile that afternoon. Before it, I'm sorry I didn't come to your funeral. I could not bear to. I'm sorry. I never forgot you. Overwhelmed with shame, I threw the receiver back into the cradle and scrambled away. It's been 10 years since it happened, and this whole time, everyone in our friend group, Kelsey, Brandon, Chris, Alex, has been acting like she never existed. Her name is never spoken. But we all remember and we all know how guilty we are. How guilty I am. She was a good girl. If she hadn't started hanging out with us alcoholic bums, she would be living her life right now. I thought she was asleep that night. When I left her in the bedroom, a resting angel. I saw the cigarettes and lighter on the bedside, but I didn't stop and think. I didn't think of the beers she'd drunk either, because I had drunk even more. I went into the living room with the others and kept on drinking. Then she came down the stairs, shrieking, a human torch. The memory coursed through my body. I swallowed it and hid it away. I lay down in the dark. Surprisingly, I began to drift off to sleep. Something had changed in me. Speaking her name had been like pulling a 12-inch knife from my chest. It hurt, but I felt lighter. Her face appeared in my mind's eye. She was so close to me, every detail resurrected from the fog of time. I shot from bed. I wanted to talk to her again. With the same force that once pulled me to the bottle, I hurried back to the phone booth. Nina, it's me again. I didn't have time to tell you back then. I love you. I know. I jumped. Did I really hear that? The voice was faint, coming from far, far away. Hello? I loved you too. The voice was a bit clearer now. It sounded exactly like her. Youthful, quick, edged with a slight raspiness that made it so distinctive. A desperate joy exploded in my heart. Nina, is that you? She let out a sad giggle, just like she used to. I tried to tell myself that this was nothing more than a parlor trick, but my guts decided otherwise. Trick or no trick, I madly needed to talk to her. Nina, are you at peace? No. No? You said no? The line crackled. Nina, are you there? Nina! I screamed, reaching for her in the strange depths of the phone line. She came back, whispering in the distance. I loved you. You were supposed to protect me. Words and tears came tumbling out of me. I know, I should have looked over you. I shouldn't have left you there. I have no excuse. I had seen you smoke in bed before. I should have thought about it. I was wasted. You deserved all the good in the world. You lit the cigarette. I jolted. All of a sudden, her voice was right by my ear, loud and seething with hate. What? That's not true. I suffered the pains of hell. She spat. My stomach dropped. The hair on the back of my neck went up. Nina, I know, you didn't deserve it. Please forgive me. You don't know, but you will find out. I jumped off. As I ran away, I heard a horrendous shriek ring out from the dangling receiver. I packed my stuff in a flash. Memory fragments of that night cut through my brain. Nina asleep on the bed, a cigarette between my lips, me staggering down the stairs. Where did my cigarette go? I can't remember. Never mind, let me get another beer. Nina coming down the stairs, a human torch. I drove around for hours. I wanted to escape, but I didn't know where to. The fog got so thick I couldn't see a thing. I swam through it, not knowing if I was still on the road, if I was still on this earth. The crash split me in two. Branches enveloped in white fumes are now leaning against my windshield like crying corpses. The car won't start anymore. The doors won't open. The windows won't break. The smell of gasoline is getting stronger by the second. I just heard a sizzle. The gasoline is making me sick. I heard another sizzle. It's so hot in here. I think these are my last words. My only friend in this town disappeared a year ago now. It took quite a big toll on me since we grew up pretty much like brothers together in our small town. I most likely would have moved away after high school if it wasn't for him, but friendships like this are something you have to cherish. Ever since grade school, we were pretty much inseparable, so we ended up doing most of our hobbies together, since there were not many things you can do in a small rural town like ours. The last hobby we ended up picking up before his disappearance was fishing. My dad was big into that, but it never really caught my attention as a kid, and when Adrian and I became teenagers, drinking and smoking seemed much more exciting than waiting around for fish. Eventually we started families, and being in our mid-30s now, we could more appreciate the time out and solace that fishing provided. I guess I understand my dad a bit now after all. He wasn't around to teach us anymore, unfortunately, so we ended up looking for information by ourselves. We looked up different forums and guides, practiced beginner techniques, and studied the fish native to the lakes that surrounded our town. Once we got the basics, it quickly turned into a contest of who could catch the biggest fish. Pike were the largest ones on average in our lakes, so we ended up focusing on those. They are most common near the bottom of lakes, so we ended up swimming further and further each time, looking for deeper, untouched spots. We were pretty much equal in our contest. When one of us caught a bigger fish than the other, the next time it would most often be the other way around. A week before he went missing, I beat his record by a lot. It seemed unlikely he would catch something bigger, but Adrian did not give up. I'll just find a better spot and I'll be back on top in no time. You'll see. I remember him smiling at me. The next couple days I was too busy with my job to join him in our hobby. Adrian decided to swim out by himself, so he could surprise me once my workload lightened. His boat was missing the day he disappeared. It's hard not to blame myself for pretty much ignoring him at the end. even though everyone around me keeps telling me it's not my fault. He was an adult going fishing and getting lost. That's not your responsibility, they kept repeating. But that didn't make me feel any better. We were still beginners. We each brought our boats when we started this hobby, and up until then, we went out together each time. The only reason he went out alone is because I had no time. The police sent divers, boats, all kinds of search vehicles, but none of them ended up finding him. I was closely involved with the rescue mission, since they said I could provide them with information about all of the fishing spots he might have gone to. Unfortunately, I didn't know the spots he might have found on his own before his disappearance. They ended up scanning the entire seafloor, but there was no sign of Adrian or his boat. They did end up finding a corpse about a week into the search, but forensics revealed no relevance to the case. It was apparently a woman, and she had been dead for well over a year. I could remember her case. I didn't know the family very well, so I wasn't sure what exactly happened. I know it's awful of me, but I was happy it wasn't Adrian. It gave his family some hope that he might still be out there, even though I couldn't bring myself to believe the same. I hadn't gone fishing since. Until yesterday. Yesterday marks the 1-year anniversary of his disappearance, and as far as I was concerned, his death. I really missed our antics, as you can imagine. Life wasn't the same since he was gone, so I decided to do something I could remember him by, something that would allow me to honor his memory and our friendship. "Honey?" I asked my wife the night before my trip. She expressed, turning around to face me. We were already lying in bed, but with the date coming up, I could not stop thinking about it. "I think I want to go fishing tomorrow," I told her. She smiled. We didn't often talk about emotions, but she always understood me nonetheless. "That's a great idea, I think," she expressed. "You still have the spare fishing rod you bought him before, right? You could bring that along as well, you know? Reminisce a bit." "I think I would like that," I replied as I thought about her suggestion. And with that, I fell asleep. But not for long. My alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. I hadn't gotten up this early in quite a while, so it took some getting used to. It felt nice, nostalgic in a way. Who knows, maybe I'd end up teaching my son how to fish once he got old enough. Hopefully he'd be more interested than I was as a kid. Either way, that possibility alone made me happy, and I was now looking forward quite a bit to today. I packed all my stuff, grabbed a couple of beers, drove out to the lake, and looked for my boat. It was still in the same position. The spiders apparently didn't mind, since it was covered in cobwebs. I spent the next half hour getting it back into shape, and by the end of it, I was ready to head out. I put both of our fishing rods in the boat, opened a beer, and toasted the sky. I took a big swig and swam out onto the lake. I still remembered all of our usual spots, but this time I wanted to find a new one. I decided to try and beat my record from a year ago, continue the challenge, so to speak. So I swam by our spots, taking in the view, and continued onward. I had really missed the silence this hobby provides. I felt like I was able to relax for the first time ever since the incident. After about 15 minutes, I was happy with the spot I had found. It was deep for sure. I threw out the anchor, waiting for it to reach the bottom longer than ever before, and got ready. I fixed my fishing rod by the boat, laid back, and relaxed with my beer. The next thing I remember was waking up. I guess I was not used to waking up this early anymore at all. I had fallen asleep for a couple of hours at the least. Judging by the sun, it was noon now. The sun stood in the middle of the sky, gleaming and illuminating everything. It was almost too bright. The sunlight reflecting on the lake was blinding, and it took my eyes a couple of seconds to adjust. As I looked around, I became confused. Nothing. I couldn't see anything. The lake expanded in every direction beyond the horizon. The lake was all I could see. I checked the anchor, but it was still fixed in place. My first thought was that I must have been swept away while I slept, but apparently this wasn't the case. And besides, while this was a big lake, it certainly wasn't big enough to lose sight of the shore on all sides. I checked my phone, but there was no reception. Not unusual out here, but still unfortunate. I was worried now. I couldn't make out which direction I came from. I would have been happy to make it back to any shore at this point. I decided to pack up my stuff and just start swimming. If this was still my lake, which I was starting to lose hope in, it's really not that large. I should be able to hit the shoreline soon. I was about to grab my anchor when I heard a sound. A familiar sound. One I hadn't even realized how much I missed. My rod had caught a fish, and it was bending quite a lot. Certainly not a small catch. I was almost hypnotized. Reflexively, I grabbed the rod and started reeling it in. I hadn't fished in quite a while at this point, of course, but ask any fisherman and they'll know. You can very well tell what is attached to your rod by the feel and the vibrations. If you hook something inanimate, for example, there will still be resistance, but if you stop reeling suddenly, the resistance will drop and you'll be able to tell that it's not a fish, and more likely some sort of weed. That's how I knew. This was not a fish. But it was certainly alive. It was thrashing and pulling in all sorts of directions. More than anything I had ever caught before. The movements erratic and violent, like it was trying to reel me in just as much as I was reeling it in. But I didn't stop. I took a step back and pulled even harder. That's when I heard another sound. It was coming from the water. A scream, a guttural, angry scream, drowned out by water filling the lung of whatever was producing it. But it was still audible. I had never heard such malice before. A shiver ran down my spine. I stopped reeling, put down my rod, and stepped away. I didn't want to catch whatever this was anymore. The sound continued, but the rod was still laying there on the ground of my boat. It wasn't being dragged in. I looked down at the spot I was fishing in and saw a dark silhouette, and it was getting larger. The sky darkened. I looked up as the boat started rustling. Large waves started to form. I hurried to grab my anchor. I needed to get the hell out of here. I felt the sweat run down my forehead as I pulled the anchor in faster than I ever had before. That's when it stopped. The sound was gone. The waves calmed down, and I could see the sunlight come back through the clouds. I breathed a sigh of relief and allowed myself a second to calm down after I placed the anchor back in the boat. I stood up and checked to see if the silhouette was gone. Thankfully it was. I grabbed some scissors from my backpack in order to cut the line. I wasn't willing to risk reeling it back up again. That thing could stay down there for all eternity for all I cared. I went to cut it when I noticed it was almost entirely reeled in. Confused, I looked into the water again. This time, I saw something. It was an arm. At least I think it was. It was bruised and bloody, covered in seaweed, and it was attached to my hook. I couldn't tell if it was just arm or if it was attached to a person, so I decided to lean in closer. The closer look didn't allow me to make out what it was attached to, but it allowed me to notice something else. The arm was moving. It was making a motion as if it was swimming, moving back and forth, and the direction was towards the surface. It touched my boat below the water. I could almost make out a body it was attached to. As it grabbed the boat and started pulling with an immense force, the boat tipped over almost immediately and I went flying into the lake. I gasped for air, but my lungs filled with water. I panicked and tried to hurry to the surface when I felt a cold hand grab my foot, dragging me further below. I flailed my arms trying to hold on to the boat, but I could only manage to grab one of the fishing rods. My whole body ached. I needed to breathe so bad I started coughing, but it only pumped the remaining oxygen from my lungs. I was starting to feel lightheaded. I opened my eyes and saw Adrian's boat. It was flipped over, lying at the bottom of the lake, a couple meters below me at most. As my sight became blurry and my head got knocked around, I saw others, tens, no, hundreds of boats, scattered across the lake bed around me. I couldn't take it anymore. My body, basically on its own, opened my mouth to try and breathe in, a last-ditch effort to cling to life. Air filled my lungs. I was regaining my consciousness as I looked around. I was at the surface, my head above water. My boat was gone. More strangely, I could see the shoreline. I was back at the same spot I had fallen asleep in. I barely made it back to the shore, my body so depleted of strength that I was sure I'd sleep for the entire rest of the week. As I lay there on the shore, looking up at the sky, I had the same thoughts I still do now. The next time someone disappears on this lake, I wonder if they will find Adrian's body instead. In movies, stories, legends, and media, you never hear about a haunted apartment. It's either the house, the land, or the person. I was 8 years old when I was diagnosed with chronic insomnia and night terrors. It was no surprise to my doctors at the time. My mom, 2 brothers, and I had just escaped my extremely abusive father. We traveled from a house in Nevada to a 3-bedroom apartment in a crappy part of Washington state. My father made enough for my mom to stay home with all of us kids, to suddenly my mom working all the time and still having to frequent the local food bank. I was just having a hard time adjusting. It's the trauma my dad put us through, mixed with my entire life being uprooted so we could be safe. My mom had the master bedroom, my brothers shared the room right next to hers, and me being the only girl had the room down the hall to myself. I remember when the dreams started, or the night terrors according to my doctor. I was walking alone in a cave. It was so real I could feel the dampness of the cave on my skin. The cold would rattle me to the bones. The echo of dripping water would fill my ears. I would walk aimlessly. It was too dark to be able to tell where I was going. Every evening it was the same, but when I went back to sleep, I would pick up where I left off, like a save point in a video game. Every night for weeks, I would just walk. Then I would wake up cold, damp, and confused. After a couple of weeks, I heard crying in my dream. I was only 8 and wanted to help, so I followed the sound of the sobs. The crying would echo throughout the cave, the drips, the cries, the dampness, the cold. I began to dread going to sleep. I just wanted to sleep, but I had to find the source of the sobs. Maybe I could end the nightmare if I did. Eventually I saw a shape in the cave. The crying had gotten louder, and I finally found the source. It took me weeks to get close to the figure. Every night getting closer and closer, but not quite reaching it. Finally, I did. A little girl around my age. Her hands were covering her face. Her shoulders shuddered with every sob. I would talk to her, try to console her, do everything I could from a distance to get her to stop crying. Then one night I got close enough to touch her. I asked if she was okay, if she was lost as well. I put my hand on her shoulder. Dead silence. No more crying. No more water dripping. No echo. Nothing. Not even the ringing in my ears I had gotten so accustomed to after my dad knocked my mom into me 2 years ago. The little girl moved her hands from her face and looked up at me. She was disgusting to look at. Her face had gouges and dried blood all over it. The palms of her hands were cut, and her wrists had slices in them. The worst part was her eyes. There was no pupil. The entire eye was black. They were sunken in her skull, as if she hadn't slept in weeks. I screamed in my dream and woke up with the scream caught in my throat. The girl was standing next to my bed. She didn't cry anymore, and I didn't dream. I didn't sleep. The dark circles under my eyes began to turn purple. They were becoming sunken in, and my mom was worried. I didn't tell her about the girl. The girl stayed in my room, and every time someone came in, she would hide in the top cubby of my sliding closet. She would look at me with a smile, her finger to her lips as she cocked her head, shushing me. At night she would talk to me, tell me that we're friends, that I saved her, that we could be friends forever if that's what I wanted. She terrified me. My mom would sometimes find me outside my brother's room, passed out in the hallway just outside their door. She took me to the doctor. Like I said, chronic insomnia and night terrors. But she still didn't know about the girl. All I told her was that I didn't like to sleep. At first they tried melatonin, then amitriptyline, then trazodone. I was so tired, but every time I would start to drift to sleep, the girl would wake me up. If I didn't respond to her, she would get violent. She would scream and hurt me. My mom would see the cuts on my arms. The doctor said I did it to myself in my sleep. I finally couldn't take it anymore. I told my mom about the girl. I told her I wanted to sleep. I didn't care that it was supposed to be a secret anymore. I didn't care if the girl was angry with me. If she hurt me, I just wanted to sleep. The night I told my mom, she let me sleep with her. I took the medication and slept for 15 hours in her bed. My mom was so worried, she called the doctor, and they essentially said I had a sleep debt. My body was trying to catch up on all the lost rest. They told her just to let me rest. It's a good sign. The next night, I was in my room again. The girl was nowhere to be found. Maybe I had to keep her secret because if I told someone, then she would have to go away. She did tell me she wanted to be my friend. I was cautious, but I was able to fall asleep pretty easily. My sleep debt hadn't been paid back yet after all. I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to use the restroom. The girl was still nowhere to be found, but for some reason I was terrified. I didn't want to leave the safety of my bed. Eventually, my bladder got the best of me. I leaped off my bed towards my bedroom door and flipped on the light. I ran down the hall to the bathroom and relieved myself. As I was sitting there finishing up, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw my mom limping down the hall. Limping isn't the right word. She was dragging one leg on the ground as if she couldn't use it at all. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I stood up, flushed the toilet, and ran out of the bathroom. I looked for my mom. She wasn't in my room, the kitchen, or the living room. A deep fear had built up in my chest. I remember running to my mom's room and finding her in bed. I remember holding on to her tight and falling asleep sobbing into her back. But that's not how the night went. My mom also woke up that evening. She said my grandmother, who had been dead for 7 months at this point, had come to her in a dream saying she had to wake up. My mom had this eerie sense of dread. She checked on my brothers. They were sound asleep in their bunk beds. Then she went to my room to check on me, but I wasn't there. She checked the boys again. I wasn't with them. Then she checked the bathroom, the kitchen, the living room. Finally, she noticed the sliding glass door was open. This led to our third-story balcony that oversaw the back parking lot of our apartment complex. She ran to the door, screaming my name. She reached me as the top half of my body was hanging over the edge of the balcony. She caught me by the shirt as I was going down and pulled me into her arms. My mom said my skin was ice cold. I was pale as snow, and when she tried to shake me awake, I just stared at her with black eyes. She just held me while sobbing, before eventually taking me back to her room. She didn't sleep. She just watched me. My mom couldn't risk another night like that. She explained to the landlord that I was sick, that I was a danger to myself, and I couldn't be on the 3rd floor. The landlord was sympathetic and let her break the lease without penalty. My grandpa had been getting ready to sell his house. He couldn't live there since my grandma passed away. He let us move in under the agreement that my mom took over renovations and kept his things safe so he didn't have to pay for a storage unit. My sleep schedule returned to normal. Eventually, we forgot. It's been 18 years since then. I've moved several times. mostly running from my abusive father. We changed our names and have moved on pretty well. My older brother and I have families of our own. My mom remarried and I haven't had night terrors. But ghosts don't haunt apartments. And last night, I had the most vivid dream. I was walking in the dark. I keep going back and forth on whether to post this. Part of me thinks writing it out will help me process it, and part of me thinks I sound like a lunatic, but whatever. Here goes. I do cleanouts for a living. Foreclosures mostly. Some abandoned rentals. Couple hoarder situations a year. Basically, once a bank or a landlord takes a property back, they call guys like me to go in and get everything out so they can sell it or rent it again. It's not glamorous work. Most days it's just garbage bags and trying not to gag. You see a lot of sad stuff. Family photos people left behind, kids' toys, one time a dog crate with the door still zipped shut, and I don't want to talk about that one. Point is, I've seen a lot of empty houses, and I've never had anything happen that I couldn't explain until 3 weeks ago. This place was a foreclosure in redacted because I don't need that headache. Been empty at least a year, probably more. Had that wet wood smell that houses get when nobody runs the heat for a while. No power, windows were so grimy you could barely see through them. Standard stuff, honestly. I've seen way worse. I was working the upstairs bedrooms. Tiny closet in the back bedroom. Barely big enough for a rod and some hangers. There were a few coats still hanging, and behind them on the floor was a metal lockbox. Like the kind you'd keep documents in. The fireproof ones from Walmart or whatever. Okay, so this is the part where I have to be honest about something. Because people keep asking me, why didn't you just leave? And the answer is because at this point, nothing weird had happened yet. It was just a box in a closet. I open boxes and containers in these houses literally every day because sometimes there's stuff worth salvaging. And sometimes there's stuff the bank needs to know about. The box wasn't locked, wasn't even latched all the way. Inside, one of those old chunky Polaroid cameras. A pack of film and a stack of photos face down. They looked blank on the back, just white. I picked them up to flip through them, and one slid off the stack and landed on my forearm where my sleeve was pushed up past my glove. Except it didn't land. It stuck, flat against my skin. Stuck. Like a sticker or like wet paper except it wasn't wet. And immediately cold. Not cool, cold. Like I'd press an ice cube to my arm. I pulled it off quick and it made that sound. You know when you peel tape off skin? That ripping, tacky sound? It took a second to come free. There was a white rectangle on my arm where it had been, and I don't mean pale, I mean white. Like the color had been sucked out of my skin, like you took a photo and erased one square of it down to nothing. I was still looking at that trying to figure out what the hell when I noticed the photo in my other hand was changing. It was developing. Or whatever the word is when a Polaroid goes from blank to showing an image. Except what it was showing was skin. My skin. I could see the freckle I have near my elbow. It was my arm, and right in the middle of the image was a dark square shape. I looked at my arm, looked at the photo. Same spot. Then my arm started hurting. Not like a cut or a sting. More like... Okay, you know when you press your thumb really hard into a muscle and hold it? That ache. But in a spot where there was no reason for it to hurt? The white rectangle on my skin started going purple while I watched. Not spreading out like a bruise normally does. Filling in. The color was filling in from the edges toward the center, staying perfectly inside the rectangle shape, like something was coloring it from the underneath. I put the photo down on the floor. Pain didn't stop. The photo finished developing and it showed my arm, with the bruise. Same shape, same size, same location. like it had taken a picture of something that hadn't happened yet and then made it happen. I left. I want to say I was calm about it, but honestly, I just kind of walked out fast. Didn't run, but definitely wasn't casual about it. So the next morning, the bruise looks like it's been there for days. Dark in the middle, tender when I press on it, perfectly rectangular, which I shouldn't have to tell you is not how bruises work. And the center of it is still lighter than the rest, almost pale. Also, and this is going to sound weird, but I swear, hair stopped growing inside the rectangle. Like that patch of skin wasn't mine anymore. Like it had been replaced with something that looked like skin but wasn't exactly. I should have left it alone. I know that. You know that. Everyone reading this knows that. But I went back to the house. I told myself I needed to finish the job because I do. They don't pay me if I don't finish. And I'm not about to lose a contract because I got freaked out by a piece of film. The box was still there. Everything was where I left it. Except the top photo on the stack wasn't blank anymore. It had developed on its own overnight, sitting in a dark closet in an empty house with nobody there. The image was the closet floor, the box, and a hand reaching toward it. My hand from earlier. But the angle was wrong. It was taken from inside the closet, from up high, like from the shelf above the rod, looking down at me opening the box. Nothing was on that shelf. I checked when I first found the box. There was nothing up there. I picked the photo up, had my work gloves on this time because I'm dumb, but not that dumb. It twitched. I need you to understand what I mean. I don't mean it moved because my hand was shaking. I mean the photo itself spasmed, like a muscle, like something alive. One quick twitch and then still again. The image started getting darker while I held it. The shadows in the closet and the picture were getting deeper. The inside of the box was going black, way blacker than it should be. And then something leaned forward out of that darkness in the photo. Not a face. That's what everybody asks me. Was it a face? No. It was more like a face-shaped dark spot. Like if darkness had layers and something pushed through from behind. My bruise lit up. Felt like someone put a cigarette out on my arm. I dropped the photo, yanked my glove off because my palm was burning now too. Red rectangle in the center of my palm. Same size as the photo edge, right where my fingers gripped it through the glove. So obviously I took the whole box home. Yeah, I know. I don't have a good explanation for why I did that, except that I think I was already past the point of making smart decisions. I think when something impossible happens to you, your brain just kind of stops running the "is this a good idea" program and starts running the "I need to understand this" program. And you do stupid things. Kitchen table, I dump everything out. Camera, film, stack of photos. I'm just sitting there, staring at it like it's going to explain itself. The camera clicked. My hands were in my lap. I was not touching it. It clicked by itself. The mechanical sound of a Polaroid taking a picture. Then the motor noise. Then a photo slid out of the front. It slid across the table and stopped right in front of me. I don't mean it traveled because the table was tilted. My table isn't tilted. It slid across a flat surface and stopped in front of me like someone pushed it. I didn't pick it up. I just sat there and watched it develop. It was me, sitting at my kitchen table from across the room, like from the doorway to the living room. In the picture, my left hand was up, and there was a black square on my palm, not the red mark that was actually there. Black, like a hole. My real hand started burning, deep, not surface level, like the pain was coming from inside my hand, from the bones or the tendons or whatever is in there. I ran to the sink and held it under cold water, and it didn't help at all. Watched the skin on my palm go white, then red, then this dark, angry color. Perfect square edges, like it was printed on me. The camera was pointed at me from the table. The lens was facing me. I had dumped it out randomly, and somehow it landed pointed right at my chair. Or it moved. I don't know. I grabbed oven mitts and shoved the camera in a metal trash can and dumped all the film and photos in after it and put the lid on and wrapped the whole thing in packing tape. Took it to the garage. Felt like I was disposing of a body or something. Went to urgent care for my hand. Nurse wrapped it up and asked what I touched. I said, an old camera. She gave me this look like she wanted to ask more but didn't. They gave me burn cream and sent me home. That night I woke up because I heard it. That sound a Polaroid makes. The click and then the whirring right next to my head. Camera was on my nightstand, with a fresh photo sitting next to it. I left it in the garage. I taped the lid. I know I did. The new photo showed my hand, bandaged up, except in the photo the bandage was soaked through. Dark. Saturated. My actual hand started itching under the bandage, then stinging, then this pulling feeling like something under my skin was being tugged sideways. I ripped the bandage off and the burn had changed. The skin inside the rectangle was smooth. Not scarred smooth, but like new, shiny, like a different type of skin had been installed there, and in the dead center was a gray mark. It looked like a doorway, a tiny rectangular doorway shape in the middle of my palm. Camera clicked again. Another photo came out, then another one, then another. I didn't think. I grabbed it with the kitchen tongs, ran to the bathroom, threw it in the tub and dumped bleach, tile cleaner, drain opener, everything under the sink on top of it. Didn't even think about the fumes. Probably should have. The camera sank to the bottom of the tub and it sank wrong. Too fast. Way too heavy for what it was. Then it started whirring. Loud. Not the normal sound it makes. Angrier. Faster. Like it was trying to take photos rapid fire from underwater. My palm felt like something was pushing out from inside, pushing against my skin from underneath, trying to get through. I yelled. I'll admit that. I'm not going to pretend I was tough about it. I yelled and almost passed out and had to sit down on the bathroom floor. The skin inside the square on my palm cracked along the edges. Clean, straight cracks. And underneath the cracked skin was raw pink new skin, like something had been pressing into it from the inside, molding it. Then the camera stopped. Everything stopped. The whirring, the pressure in my hand, all of it just done. I left everything in the tub for 3 days. Didn't go near the bathroom. Used the kitchen sink to brush my teeth. I don't care if that's gross. When I finally went in there and fished stuff out, the photos were ruined. Warped and swollen and fused together. The camera looked partially melted, the plastic all warped and discolored. I thought, okay, it's over. Whatever that was, it's done. Then I picked up the photo from the stack and on the back of it, pressed into the surface like someone wrote it with a fingernail or words. Keep still while it develops. That night my phone wouldn't unlock. Face ID wouldn't work. I tried the passcode. Tried fingerprints. Looked at my fingers. The ridges were gone. My fingerprints, they were just smooth. Both hands, all 10 fingers. Smooth like paper. Like photo paper. It's been a few weeks now. Nothing else has happened. The rectangle scar on my palm is still there. Skin inside it still feels different. Tighter. Thinner. Gets cold sometimes randomly. Real cold. Same cold I felt when that first photo stuck to my arm. My fingerprints haven't come back. I had to set up a new passcode for everything. Couldn't even log into my banking app for 3 days. Try explaining to your bank that you need a password reset because a haunted camera stole your fingerprints. You can't. You just say you forgot it. I don't know what was in that camera. I don't know what it was trying to do to me. I don't know if that gray doorway shape on my palm is what I think it is. But sometimes at night my hand gets cold in that spot, and it feels like something on the other side is pressing back, waiting for another picture. So yeah, don't touch old Polaroids you find in empty houses, because whatever's on the other side of that film, it doesn't just take pictures, it takes prints. So, I bought a new phone recently and they had a new ad-supported plan. Basically, I'd pay less each month, but I would occasionally get ads that take over the screen. The salesman said it wouldn't interrupt calls or alarms and I'd still have the ability to call emergency services. The ads used Face ID, and I would need to look at the screen for 10 seconds to dismiss them. I decided to go for it, cut my monthly bill nearly in half. They didn't push the ads too often. Hell, I didn't even get one until I had already been using the device a week. I logged on to check Twitter. Yes, I still call it Twitter, and my screen went gray. Then a message popped up at the top saying, McDonald's ad. That was it. Until I looked at it. The screen played a video of a Big Mac on a plate, the camera slowly circling. After 10 seconds of looking at it, the ad snapped off and I was back to Twitter. The ad worked though. I was pretty hungry, so I ordered McDonald's. They'd always start the same way. Gray screen, line announcing what company the ad was for. Ad started when I had been looking at the screen for a second or two. It was weird, I admit, but the ads were infrequent, and the phone was good. I was happy. Then, after about a month, my phone pinged as if I'd got a message. Would you like to opt in for targeted ads? It said. Below were 2 buttons for me to press. Yes, please, and no, keep them generic. I sighed and stared at the options for a moment. I did hate getting random ads. The day before I'd received one for menstrual cups, and every third seemed to be a gambling ad. But the notion of rubber stamping their desire to sift through my information and habits left a bad taste in my mouth. So I clicked no, keep them generic. At which point a further message popped up. Are you sure? And below that, yes, I want to opt in. And no, I've changed my mind. There was no right answer. I swore under my breath. New phone and it already had a bug. I clicked one of the options and accepted the targeted ads because until I did the thing was a glorified paperweight. Congratulations. From now on we will target ads just for you, Brian. I didn't like that. Sure, I was signed in, and logically it had my name, but no. Nuh-uh. I was getting the thing fixed or returned or something. I brought it up to my roommate Eric, because he was good with technology. Better than me, at least. He just laughed, his massive frame jiggling. Oh yeah, they probably own your soul now. Gonna snatch you in your sleep to human centipede you. He said. Dude, I'm serious. It's weird. How do I fix it? You're such a baby. Fine, give it here. He extended a meaty paw. I slipped my phone from my pocket and was about to pass it to him when it pinged. I stared at the message that enveloped the screen. Federal ad 4040. He is not your roommate. Do not trust him. I froze, staring at the screen, trying to process the message. What is it? Eric leant forward to try and see my phone. The ad was gone, but I quickly stuffed it back in my pocket anyway. Nothing. Work thing. I tried. They need me to come in. Bummer. Want me to check out your phone first? What? Oh, no, I gotta run. Cool beans, bud. I'll take a look at your phone when you get back, Eric said. I moved past him and out of our apartment. I kept my pace steady down the dingy hallway before tearing down the stairs. Why was he so fixed on getting my phone? Cool air outside hit me like a truck, and I took deep breaths that needled at my throat. Paranoia. That's all it was. Paranoia and poor timing. No doubt I'd received an ad for some new show coming to Netflix or Apple that just happened to seem relevant. Eric wasn't acting any different to usual. I shook my head at what an idiot I'd made myself out to be. I turned to go back inside but hesitated. What if I was wrong? I was being silly, logically. I knew I was. Still, I clearly needed to be away from my apartment for a while. I ducked into the nearest coffee shop to escape the cold and warm myself back up. The staff were an ever-changing supply of college students working while they studied, with only the manager remaining somewhat consistent. The girl who took my order was new to me. She had both sides of her bottom lip pierced and wore dark makeup. "Hey welcome to Roast and Grind. What can I get ya?" Her voice was so chipper it seemed at odds with her appearance. Her smile was wide and warm, perfect teeth proudly displayed. "Coffee, please. Black coffee," I mumbled. I focused on the cookies and cakes displayed at the counter, worried I looked paranoid. "One Americano coming up. What size would you like?" "Medium." "Okay. Anything else today, sir?" she asked. I shook my head. I used my phone to pay. The barista said something else, but I wasn't listening. A new ad had appeared on my phone. Federal Ad 6661. You live alone. My mouth went dry. The ad vanished and I stuffed my phone back in my pocket. It had to be coincidental. It had to. That thought was the only thing keeping me going at that point. The alternative, the truth, was unthinkable. I grabbed my coffee when it was ready and slunk into a seat in the corner, away from the few other customers currently around. I needed a wall behind me. I felt watched. If you suffer from anxiety, then your doctor will likely tell you to reduce your caffeine intake. It increases the heart rate and can exacerbate symptoms. At least, that's what my doctor told me. But I've always found coffee soothing. The bitter aroma, the slight acidity. It calms me. It feels like a pleasant warmth spreading through my body, and the dense, writhing ball of worries in my head slows and lightens. Other patrons buzzed about it in ones and twos, eating, drinking, coming, going, all while I sat and slowly sipped my coffee. It was several hours later that I finally returned to my apartment to find it empty. I figured Eric had gone to work or something, and laughed at myself for being such a nut. I didn't get any more ads the rest of the day. The day after, I got one for Starbucks while I was getting ready for work. No doubt based on the amount of time I'd spent sat in a coffee shop. I resolved to take the phone in for repair after work. I was still twitchy about giving it to Eric. Couldn't get those ads out of my mind. Besides, there was no guarantee he could fix it, but the Nerd Hub or Geek Club or whatever would get it sorted. The office was quiet. We were still doing that hybrid working that meant you only had to be in 3 days a week. Tracy and Bevan were in attendance, having a heated argument about the ending of some TV show. "Morning," I called to them. "Hey," Tracy said. Bevan managed a wave in my general direction, not breaking the flow of his current diatribe. It was normal, exactly what I needed after the weird panic I'd worked myself into the day before. I spent most of the time filling in reports, fixing a spreadsheet that someone had butchered since I'd last used it, and logging my hours with various clients. At lunch, I grabbed a tuna melt from the food van that parked by the office, and sat in the cubby canteen rather than the main canteen. It was a small room that was probably meant for meetings, but no one used it, so our team had seized control and stuck a mini fridge and snack bar in there. Bevan virtually threw himself into the seat opposite me, flicking his hair from his eyes. "Tell me you've seen it," he asked, punctuating the question by ripping the film off his own sandwich. "Seen what?" I could only assume he wanted to launch into the same rant he'd subjected Tracy to that morning. Before he answered, my phone buzzed. Federal Ad 1343, 1343. The recursions exist to stabilize. The recursions exist to stabilize. The message filled the screen and began scrolling before it winked out. Bevan was staring at me. Clearly I'd missed the name of whatever show he was talking about. "Have you heard of a show called Federal?" I asked. I figured he was up with popular shows, and that was probably the name given how other ads had displayed. Bevan looked annoyed for a moment, before his desire to be the source of media knowledge won out, and he started thinking. No. What's it about?" Well, I don't know. Just keep getting ads for it on my phone, I said. Show me, show me, show me. I need something to binge. He shuffled his chair around next to me so he could see my phone. It was blank. I explained about the ad contract I had. That's wild. I know they did something like that for Pluribus, so it's probably Amazon or something scrambling to catch up. I'ma definitely look it up. The day ended. Bevan and Tracy both packed up and left, and I sat at my computer. Something at the back of my mind I couldn't quite place. I finished up the report I was doing and finally shut my PC down. Just had to check and make sure the phone place was still open, and I hadn't missed it by not going to lunch. Before I got a chance, my phone rang. Mom displayed on the screen. Hey Mom, sorry. Was I supposed to call? No, I was just reminiscing. I was in your old room today, dusting. Your father says I need to leave the dust be. It isn't worth my back, she said. I smiled. They'd turned my old room into a spare bedroom. Mostly the same furniture, just no longer decorated for a 16-year-old boy. Anyway, I was moving things around to dust and I found an old Polaroid on the shelf. It's a picture of Maxie and I thought you might want it. Maxie was my first dog. Well, she was my parents' dog. They'd had her 2 years when I was born, and the stubborn mutt stayed with me until I was 15. It was pretty good going for the Beagle Terrier Retriever that she was. She'd adored me, and seemed to think I was her puppy. Yeah, that'd be really nice. I'll swing by this weekend, I said. I could feel my eyes well up as I remembered her. My parents had had dogs since then, but they weren't Maxie. Okay, honey. You be safe. I love you. Love you too, Mom. I hung up and was content to let my mind drift to thoughts of Maxie when an ad popped up on my phone. Federal ad 3991. Do you remember your mother's voice? Are you certain that was her? I dropped my phone. It clattered loudly against my desk before tumbling to lie on the floor. I took deep breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Stomach breaths, like my therapist had suggested. Coincidence. That's all it was. My heart slowly steadied and I felt calmer, but I continued the breathing exercise to settle myself. I still had a hint of trepidation when I picked up the innocuous device that was causing me such attacks. I checked that it still worked and that it didn't have another unpleasant advertisement for me. It showed my normal lock screen. Starry night. Peaceful. I tucked the phone into my inside pocket and packed up my things. I decided to go straight home and curl up away from everyone for the night. The phone could be dealt with tomorrow. Poppy synth music floated down the hall from my apartment, and I slipped in to find Eric splayed on the recliner watching some weird show. Hey, he said, obviously hearing the door because he didn't turn from the TV. Ordered pizza. Cool, thanks, man. Let me know the damage. I'm gonna lay down, I said. He gave me a thumbs up, still engrossed in his show. He never asked for or accepted any money for the pizzas. I must have owed him a fortune. I kept the lights off in my room and put on some white noise. It was all so stupid getting worked up over some ads on my phone. I lay down on my lumpy mattress and closed my eyes. I focused on the white noise. At some point, I fell asleep. I was stood in a server room, or what movies have taught me was a server room. Racks of gray computers, sprawled endlessly in a white room bathed in blue light. I took a step and the sound echoed all around me. I waited for the responding sound of pursuit. Nothing. I moved around the technological labyrinth, ever mindful in case a mechanical minotaur awaited me. The tiled floor beneath me became metal grating. Blue light reflected in the dark pool of water, revealed beneath the grates. A red light's flickering reflection guided me forward to the heart. A laptop, old and boxy, sat on a tray. A bright yellow cable dangled from it to the floor. The red light came from the nearby server, next to a port that matched the connector on the cable. Instinctively, I grabbed the cable and reconnected it. The laptop beeped happily. Then a current surged up through my feet and raced along my body. I lost control of my legs and should have toppled, but the electricity kept my muscles in place. The sensation vibrated through me, accelerated. My arms cramped and curled on the verge of tearing free. I could feel my heart, feel it quivering. My vision fuzzed at the edges. The laptop beeped, and before my eyes burst, I just managed to make out the text that appeared. Federal Ad 8065. The dreams can be fatal. My eyes burst open and I sat up in bed gasping. My phone was beeping, and when I looked at it, the same message from my dream was displayed. My heart struggled to regain composure after the dream. I went to stand, but an intense pain stabbed at my feet. Peeling off my socks revealed red welts on the soles of my feet arranged in a grid. Gingerly, I touched one of the welts, not entirely believing the evidence of my eyes. The lightest touch sent a shock racing along the lines. A knock at my door drew me away from the whirlpool my thoughts were drowning in. Eric opened my door a moment later, proffering a pizza box like it was a holy relic. "I bring pizza," he declared. "Hey, what happened to your foot?" "I don't know." "Man, looks like you jumped onto a steam vent. Put some Neosporin on it. Don't want to catch an infection." He handed me my pizza and left before returning a minute later to toss a tube of Neosporin Plus onto my bed. "Thanks, Eric. I'm having the weirdest week," I said, reaching for the ointment. He gave me an understanding nod and closed my door. I decided to eat my pizza before applying the ointment because there was no way I'd make it to the bathroom to wash my hands, and I didn't want Neosporin pizza. The next day the lines were faded and, well tender, I could place my weight on them. After a sleepless night of speculation, I still wasn't sure if the ad had saved my life, or been the thing trying to kill me. Either way, I decided to leave my phone at home and head to work without it. It was just me, Tracy, and Bevan in the office again. They seemed to be rehashing the same argument as yesterday, so I left them to it and moved to my desk. Irritatingly, there had been some technical issue, and I had to replicate a lot of the work I'd done the day before, not before spending an hour in a tedious call with IT. However, which culminated in them informing me they couldn't recover any of it. I was relieved when lunch finally came around, and I could grab a sandwich from the truck. I had barely sat down when Bevan swept into the seat opposite me. He flicked his head to move the hair from his eyes. "Tell me you've seen it," he said as he tore open his sandwich. The words gave me an odd feeling, tickling a memory. My phone pinged, and I pulled it out of my pocket. It was an ad. Federal Ad 1343, 1343. The recursions exist to stabilize. The recursions exist to stabilize. The sentence went on and on, scrolling up my screen. I dropped my phone like it was on fire and darted away from the table. "Whoa, geez, Bry guy. You okay there?" Bevan asked. He had paused mid-bite to follow the trajectory of the phone as it bounced off the table and sailed onto the floor. I didn't reply, just took a wide circle around the device and darted out the door. I had left my phone in my room. I remember leaving it, but there it was in my pocket. The same message as yesterday. Only then did I realize it was all the same. Everything at the office was the same. I didn't return to my desk. I left the building as fast as I could. I got in my car and drove. I considered my apartment, but it didn't feel safe. I needed to feel safe. I went home. Mom's eyes lit up when she opened the door and saw me standing on her porch. She positively fell forward and smothered me in a hug. "Oh, sweetheart, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. Haven't anything in to feed you now." She sniffled, finally letting me go. "It's fine, Mom. Just needed to get away and clear my head." Inside, Dad sat on his chair by the fire, squinting through his glasses at the day's paper. He looked up as I stepped in. "Who let that one in?" He jested. "Nice to see you too, Dad." I dropped onto the couch. It's almost supernatural the way you can slip back into an earlier part of your life. I'd moved out 15 years ago, and didn't see my folks anywhere close to enough. Yet we all sat in the front room with some game show playing on the TV, and it was like I'd never left. Mom and I talked about Aunt Judy's affair, or Cousin Derek's latest get-rich-quick scheme. All the while Dad offered the occasional humorous remark as he attempted to read his paper. It must have been an hour later when Mom's phone rang. "Yes, hello?" She answered. "He's actually here with me. Did you want to speak with him?" Her eyes flicked to me and I groaned. I shook my head frantically, but Mom held out the phone. "Hello?" I said, having reluctantly accepted the phone. There was no reply. "Hello?" I tried again. I looked at the screen. The call had disconnected. Then the screen went gray as an ad overtook the device. Federal ad 9358. "We promise we won't hurt you." My blood ran cold. "Mom?" I did my best to keep my voice level. "Who was on the phone?" "Oh, it was..." she said. Her face scrunched up as she tried to remember. "Mom?" "I'm sorry, dear. I can't remember." She seemed more embarrassed than afraid that she couldn't recall such a simple fact mere moments after it had happened. I turned her phone off and placed it face down on the floor. It took some convincing before Mom and Dad agreed to surrender their cell phones, but after they saw the ad that appeared on Dad's phone, it became a lot easier. Federal ad 7920. "The horrors will pursue you through the screen." It's inconvenient to live without a smartphone in the modern world, but thankfully not impossible. Not yet. It hasn't stopped the incidents, though. Sometimes people in the street will very incessantly hand me their phones, where another ad awaits. It's gotten more threatening, but thankfully I haven't had another dream. I don't know why it doesn't speak to me like it did my mom, like it has others. Then again, maybe it has. Mom doesn't have any memory of the call now, or what the person she spoke to sounded like. Maybe I get calls from it all the time. I hold no expectation that this could ever, or will ever, make it from my little laptop to the internet. I set up Starlink last fall on the suggestion of my sister so we could chat from time to time. Since our parents passed, she has been my only connection to the outside world, and might be my only hope of making it from this cabin. So I write this for her. I figure that it can't hurt my situation to post this here. So to those reading, if you feel compelled to help, just make sure you don't get yourself killed. If you have ever glanced upon snow-speckled hills, pockmarked by trees littered with long fallen leaves, then you would never know how bright it is. Snow blindness was, and is, a problem on the cold, windy days here. The sun bounces off the stark whiteness of the world and catches your eye. Air, long since stripped of any moisture, burns the back of your throat. Many cough, and if you live where I live, you know you shouldn't. It only irritates your throat worse. The sun dips early in the evening, as if to show that snow not only brightens the day, but lights the night as well. Moonbeams cast shadows, with shadows as crisp as day. Deer dance between the trees, chasing one another. The hard outlines between everything and the snow at night makes winter my favorite season. There are no gray areas where the world turns black and white. Our house sits near the edge of a 72-acre plot along the Appalachian Range. You might be fooled if I told you it was somewhere else, and forgiven for believing me. We're about as close to Canada as you can get without crossing a border. I say all this so that you might better understand the decisions I make as I tell you this. If you don't understand what the cold is, or what it can do, then don't pretend to. The main currency is, as always, time. How long can you keep moving? How long can you stay outside before your brain slows? Before you lose your dexterity and you can't even light your lighter? These are decisions taken for granted elsewhere, Out here, they're the only ones that matter. 3 weeks ago, I started seeing lights above the trees. They began low, but by the end of the night, they reached the top of the canopy, moving from one limb to another. There aren't many people who live here. There is, however, a snowmobile trail that wraps around the base of my land, passing small cabins built for shelter. I watched the lights with my golden retriever, Cooper, as the wood stove cracked behind me. First one, then two, sometimes as many as 5, moving through the treetops. "What do you think they are?" I asked him. He gave me the look that meant I was asking too much. I had to go into town for fuel. I figured it might be worth making it a 2-day trip. I could pull a sled with my snowshoes and cut through the trees. I wouldn't take the snowmobile. I wanted to see the lights. I could leave in the evening, stay at the motel, and drag my supplies back in the morning. I left as the sun had just begun its nightly ritual of casting long shadows through the trees. I live on a hill, not a mountain, but one you can see from one end of the property to the other. I marched onward with enthusiasm, Cooper padding ahead of me, stopping to inspect trees for reason known only to him. At the edge of the property, he stopped. He stared down the trail. There's little doubt he can hear snowmobiles miles before I do, but as I turned left toward town, he began to growl in a way he had never done before, low and with a frantic menace that spun me back around, as I was sure it had to be coming from a much larger animal. His hackles rose. He backpedaled, looking up. I did as well, and I blinked tears out of my eyes as I tried to make out the outlines against the still setting sun. Clumps of leaves lay in tree branches, and some shifted in the wind. Squirrel nests and some branches that just never noticed the season changed. I tugged his leash, and he snapped out of it. Just spooked by the movement, clearly, but every few steps he looked back. So did I. There were no lights yet. The sun had only just begun its descent. Every step felt heavy, like being a kid doing something you know you were not supposed to. I thought about turning back then, not because I was afraid, but because the math no longer worked. The trail felt unfamiliar to me, trees closer, as if it was closing in. I told myself it was the light, how the snow bends it, stretches it, lies about space. I'd lived here long enough to know better than to trust my eyes in winter. Still, I kept walking. Stopping felt worse than being wrong. Snowmobiles sat idle at the trailhead. Not unusual. People often parked them there and walked down to the still open stream to fish for trout. There were more than usual, but that alone didn't explain the way they were parked. Some sat half on the trail. Others were simply abandoned where they'd stopped. Keys still hung in the ignitions. The wind pressed against my back. Its slender fingers crept up my spine and settled at the base of my neck. I turned to see nothing. The trail was empty and quiet. Another breeze started to water my eyes, and I turned back into the town. Town should have been warm, small, cozy. A main street with a bakery, hardware store, laundromat, and motel. It wasn't. Cars sat abandoned, half buried as if the winter itself had claimed them. Snow drifts covered the streets, announcing the plows had not come in at least a week. I grabbed Cooper by the collar and turned him away. "Come on, Coop, we've got work to do." The gas station was worse. Where there should have been a cluster of snowmobiles and people fueling up, there were only the skeletal frames of the pumps, burned out. I felt panic rise, but forced it down. We still needed fuel. The motel would have backup generators, reserve tanks, maybe even a maintenance snowmobile. With any luck, someone to explain what the hell had happened. The motel doors were choked with snow, but opened freely enough. Inside was a campsite, tents, fire pits, no people. The air was stale and warm in pockets, like bodies had been packed too close for too long. Sleeping bags lay unrolled and abandoned. A child's mitten sat on the counter, stiff with old snow. Someone had stacked shoes neatly by the door. as if they meant to come back. Above the counter, scrawled in coal or blood, were 4 words. "They're in the trees." Whatever had happened here hadn't been sudden. It had been waited for. "Come on, Coop," I said, gripping his collar. "We're going back." I had a sat phone at home. I could call for help. I didn't know who. I didn't know what I would say. I only knew I needed to leave. The sun was low when we reached the tree line again. The wind battered my face and I pulled my scarf over my nose. I hadn't gone half a mile when the trees began to move. I don't know how long they'd been moving before I noticed. A thin, pale, branchless trunk pulled itself from the snow and came down again, silent, 10 feet closer to the trail. I looked up. It wasn't a tree. It was one of 4 limbs belonging to a pale, spindly thing. Its spider-like appendages ended in what I could only describe as a distorted man. Small black eyes tracked the canopy. It hadn't noticed me. I crouched behind the snowmobiles, moving slowly, never taking my eyes off it. It was watching the trail ahead, waiting. Deer came into view. A leg rose from the snow and came down through one of them. It didn't bend. It lifted the animal into the trees, pinning it in the branches until it went limp. The limb slid free, careful, deliberate. The creature fed. That's when I understood. As the light started to lose its grip on the world, I saw what I had mistaken as leaves, squirrel nests, and holdouts from a warmer time were anything but. Bits of winter gear, pieces of people, hanging in the canopy like berries waiting to be plucked. As it fed, its abdomen began to glow, bright as a star. Another shape stepped from the trees. Then another. I didn't breathe. My fingers dug into Cooper's collar through my gloves, begging him not to make a sound. We moved together, slow and careful, stepping where the snow looked softest. I stopped watching them and watched the ground instead. Their legs could cross in one step that would take me 10. As I rounded the group of them, I felt the burning in my lungs begging for air. Without thinking, I sucked in a breath as quietly as possible, long and deep, letting the cold air burn the back of my throat all the way down. I coughed. The sound burst from me before I could stop it. They froze. Nothing moved. Not the trees, not the snow. Even the wind seemed to pull back, as if it didn't want to be noticed. The first creature locked eyes with me. Small black insect-like jewels glittered in the creature's white face, now stained with gore. The light from the other creatures dimmed, one by one. Each turned towards me and let their lights go out. The forest went dark. I ran. I didn't look back. I made sure Cooper stayed ahead of me. I climbed the hill until my lungs burned and my legs failed. I slammed the door and collapsed inside the cabin. I grabbed my sat phone from the 3rd drawer down at my desk and held the power button. The amount of relief I felt collapsing through the doorway was palpable. The dread I felt watching the sat phone blink its dead battery sign was equal. I have no fuel to run the generator. I have 2 cords of wood left to heat my house, and a week worth of food. The only thing I have that does have power is the laptop and the solar panel I have set up to the Starlink. I fear that too will soon be covered in snow, and I'll lose my last connection to the world. As I write this, I know this very well could be the last that remains of me. The trees around the house have begun to shift. Eventually, I'll have to step outside. So I say again as a warning to anyone that deigns to play hero and try to come and get me out of here. If you have never glanced upon snow-speckled hills, pockmarked by trees littered with long fallen leaves, then you would never know how bright it is. Snow blindness was, and is, a real problem. It makes them harder to spot during the day. Air, long since stripped of any moisture, burns the back of your throat. Many cough, and if you live where I live, you know you shouldn't. They might hear you. A sick man kidnapped me. He seemed remorseful after the fact, speaking about some alien entity threatening to destroy the whole world unless he sacrifices me to this entity. A thing he called Unketsis. Since his actual name isn't particularly relevant, I'll refer to him as John. See, John had a very disorganized speech and an impossible train of thought. Surely he was delusional, clearly ill, as I said. I let myself be taken hostage because I have time and very little to do with my time. With that in mind, I played along with the poor man. John, for all his faults, worked hard to delay what he thought was inevitable. Unfortunately, Unketsis won out, and I had to be sacrificed. Needless to say, it didn't work out as intended, not for a lack of trying. No, John tried to sacrifice me. Technically, he succeeded. Technically. I didn't work out because I am immortal. I cannot permanently die, not as far as I know. Trust me, I've tried. Others have tried to kill me too. Nothing seems to work so far. Temporarily, I can die, but eventually my body fixes itself. There are drawbacks to that. I'm not immune to the pains of dying. And John? Well, John made it a very long night. I was partially flayed with a hot iron, force-fed my own burnt skin, then disemboweled and hanged from my own intestine. After that, he tore open my back, shattered my ribcage, and draped the lungs over the exposed bone. I felt all of that. Every single moment. Adrenaline shots worked like magic to keep me awake and prolong my suffering. There are no words to describe the agony John put me through. Bless his heart, he kept apologizing and weeping throughout. Imagine a man screaming with no lungs. That's what it was like. Eventually it stopped and I died. Imagine John's shock when he found me walking out of his basement unscathed. He looked and screamed like he'd seen a ghost. I could have laughed if he didn't stab me through the arm and a lung in that moment. Pinning him to the wall was surprisingly easy before I spun him a tale, playing into his delusions. I told him that I too was a devotee of Unketsis, and that the whole ordeal was just a test to see whether he was worthy of an awakening. Being the sick man he was, he believed every word. I explained that I was immortal thanks to our God. In reality, it's been so long that I don't know if I was born this way or became like this. What I do know is that if someone eats my flesh or drinks my blood, they gain some superhuman ability. I mentioned how I've been killed many times before, in part to be consumed. What happens every time, though, is that whoever partakes in my consumption ends up with an ability that inadvertently kills them every single time. So I told John that drinking my blood would make him an immortal too. It's hard for me to say I was angry with him. One effect of a long life is detachment. I couldn't care less what happened to this insignificant creature, but a terrible night was worth teaching a lesson over. So I convinced John that he wanted this immortality I was promising him, and once he agreed, I pulled out the knife from my body. I shoved my wounded arm straight into his mouth, making sure he got a good taste of my blood. I kept it there until he started gagging and regurgitating and wouldn't stop, even then, only relenting when the collapsed lung in my chest finally knocked me out, and we both fell to the ground. I came to my senses only hours later, to the sound of a weeping man. The room was coated in patches and handprints of gold. Almost everything around me shone with an auric radiance. The walls, the floor, the furniture, everything had a tinge of that precious metal coating it. At its center, facing me, sat John, half covered in gold himself, rocking back and forth. The metal seemed to slowly spread over his body as his movements became stiffer and stiffer with each passing moment. He was muttering and crying to himself. His own Midas touch was slowly killing him, quicker than I even anticipated. By the time I picked myself up, he could barely beg for help. A dreadful look of fear in his desperate gaze penetrated straight through me. It's been a while since something sent shivers down my spine, but in this state, this sick man definitely did. He barely managed to lift one gold-plated arm in my direction when he saw me get up, and his cries for help slowly morphed into something far worse, and far less human, breathless, suffocated, almost crushed. A hiss. A death rattle escaping from a crack in a metallic statue when the wind blows through it. That was the sound of a man screaming with no lungs. His death was slower than it seemed. Even after falling silent, he must have had some time before the gold statue encasing his organs fully hardened, collapsing his lungs and heart in place. The worst part of it all was that even after the gold covered his body completely, it must have been only skin deep, because I watched his eyes dart about, almost pleading, for another minute or two before their gaze fell on me, dilating one last time, stuck in place, yet somehow following me across the room until I left.